Hello, and thank you for watching Westferry Times. I'm Emily. We're diving straight into something really quite pressing today. It's about serious funding cuts. Cuts that are threatening child sexual abuse support services right across the UK.
Yes, and it's more than just concerning, Emily. It feels like a crisis.
Yeah.
When you think about it, there are over 55,000 people waiting for support right now.
55,000.
Exactly. And the wait is often around 6 months, sometimes longer. The potential for further harm, long-term damage, it's just immense.
Absolutely. And to help us really get to grips with this, understand the depth of the crisis and what's really at stake, we're joined by David Thompson. He's the Director of Policy at the National Center for Child Protection. David, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's vital we talk about this.
Okay, David, let's just get right into it. Can you give us a sense, what does the landscape look like right now on the ground for these support services?
The picture, unfortunately, is one of, well, increasing strain. Across the country, these really vital services are facing significant funding cuts. And this has direct consequences. It forces organizations to make incredibly tough decisions. Decisions about staff, about the services they offer. And in the worst cases, it means closing down completely. We've already seen some pretty alarming examples.
Such as, can you give us one?
Well, yeah, Devon Rape Crisis, for instance. A service so many people relied on, they had to shut down their helpline.
The whole helpline.
Yes, after a really big cut, about a third of their funding gone. That's just, well, a lifeline disappeared for people in need.
Gosh, that must be devastating for that community.
It really is.
Yeah.
And sadly, it's not, just a one-off. Chester Sexual Abuse and Support Service. They've been running for nearly 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah, and they were forced to close their doors recently, too. They said it was down to unsustainable funding challenges. These aren't just stats. These are real services vanishing.
So is this just happening in a few spots, or are we seeing this kind of thing more broadly across the UK?
Regrettably, the evidence points to this being a widespread issue. A recent survey, Rape Crisis England and Wales did one. It revealed that a shocking 47% of their centers expect further cuts to their core funding.
47%. Almost half.
Exactly. It's not just a few centers scattered about, it's nearly half expecting less money to operate. And the direct result, well, it's going to be more service cuts or, like we've seen, potential closures nationwide. It affects cities, rural areas, everywhere. Access to support is just becoming so much harder simply because the funding isn't reliable.
That really does paint a stark picture. So let's focus on the human cost. What does this funding crisis actually mean for survivors, people who desperately need these services? What are the implications?
Well, the immediate thing, the biggest consequence is longer waiting times. We're already seeing waits averaging around 6 months, which is, frankly, far too long for someone who's been through that kind of trauma.
6 months is already so long.
It is. And these funding cuts will only make it worse. They'll push those waits out even further. For survivors, these long periods without professional help can seriously hinder their healing. Trauma can get, well, entrenched. It could lead to complex mental health issues, problems in education, finding or keeping work, a huge strain on relationships with family, friends. That really crucial window for getting help early on, it's shrinking.
It sounds like these delays aren't just postponing healing. They could actually make the trauma worse.
Precisely. And, Baroness Newlove put it very powerfully. She warned that without timely specialist help, some victims might just lose hope. They might give up on trying to get justice altogether. The emotional weight of waiting for help when you're already carrying so much, it can just be unbearable.
You mentioned the general impact. Are there particular groups of survivors who might be hit even harder by these cuts?
Yes, definitely. There are specific vulnerabilities we need to think about. Children with special educational needs, for instance, they're particularly at risk. Delays in getting assessments, getting the right kind of tailored support, it can leave them more susceptible to further harm and really slow down their recovery.
Okay.
And another thing that's worrying is the ongoing lack of resources for services, specifically for boys and for men and for people from ethnic minority communities. These cuts risk making those existing gaps even wider. It creates a situation where getting the support you need depends more on where you happen to live
Right.
than on what you've been through. It becomes a kind of postcode lottery for support.
A postcode lottery. That's a really troubling thought. So, okay, let's shift focus a bit. What about the government's response? What have they said or done about these challenges?
Well, the government has certainly, made public statements. They've said they're committed to protecting funding for victims of sexual violence. And that commitment On the surface, it sounds positive,
Hmm.
reassuring. But when you actually look at the financial situation these services are dealing with, there seems to be a pretty big gap between the words and, well, where the money's actually going.
So the intention might be stated, but the funding isn't quite following through. Is that fair?
That seems to be the case, yes. For example, the main grant, the core grant for victim services, it's actually set to fall by 4.2%.
So
Yes, decrease. And on top of that, there was a separate but really important fund, the Support and Specialist Services Fund. It was specifically for tackling violence against women and girls.
yes,
That's been axed entirely,
axed, completely gone.
completely gone. So you have the government talking about protection, but the financial reality for many of these vital organizations is one of, well, contraction. It directly contradicts those assurances.
Are there any new funding plans or other ways support might come through to make up for these losses?
There is talk, ongoing discussion, about the proposed redress scheme for child sexual abuse victims. And the potential scale of that is huge. Estimates are between, say, 5 billion and 10 billion. It's substantial.
Okay, that sounds as a lot.
It is. And the scheme itself is important. It acknowledges past failures, tries to offer some compensation, but there's a real worry that it might, perhaps unintentionally, overshadow the immediate critical need for sustained investment in the actual support services survivors need right now.
Ah, I see. The redress is one thing, but the ongoing support is another.
Exactly. Without that immediate injection of funds to keep services running, keep them accessible, the redress scheme by itself won't be enough. Survivors need that support to navigate the legal process or just to get the therapy they desperately need to recover. The two really have to work together.
That makes complete sense. You can't really engage with the redress process if you're completely unsupported and traumatized. So, looking ahead then, what can actually be done? What are the concrete steps to try and fix this crisis and make sure these vital services can actually keep doing their work?
Well, several key things are essential, really. Firstly, as we've been discussing, the government has to make a real, tangible commitment. Prioritize long-term, sustainable funding for these services. And the funding needs to be enough to guarantee access for all survivors. Doesn't matter where they live or their specific situation.
Okay, sustainable funding first. What else?
Secondly, there's a recommendation from Rape Crisis England and Wales for a centralized, multi-year funding approach. And that's absolutely vital. It would give these organizations the stability they desperately need. It lets them plan ahead, focus on delivering services, rather than constantly chasing short-term funding pots.
That stability point sounds crucial. It must take up so much energy constantly worrying about money.
It really does. It would free them up to focus on their actual mission supporting survivors instead of financial survival. Yeah. And thirdly, it's just imperative that all the recommendations from the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, ICSA, are fully implemented and quickly.
All of them.
Yes. That includes things like mandatory reporting and much better data collection. These are fundamental to understanding the real scale of the problem and making sure our responses are effective.
Okay. And for people listening, maybe feeling quite moved or concerned by this, what can the public do? It can feel like such a huge issue for one person.
Public awareness and advocacy are actually incredibly powerful. Don't underestimate that. Supporting your local charities that provide these services, maybe offering your time as a volunteer if you can, and also contacting your elected representatives, your MP, voicing your concerns about these funding cuts. When enough people do that, it makes a difference. Raising your voice, making it clear to policymakers that this issue matters to the public, that's a really effective way to push for change.
David, thank you so, so much for explaining all of this, for shedding light on what is clearly a critical situation and giving us such valuable insights.
Thank you, Emily.
That's about right.
It's absolutely vital that we act now. We need to ensure survivors get the support they urgently need and, prevent further harm.
And for all of you listening, if you or someone you know needs support, please know there are resources out there. Rape Crisis England and Wales runs a 24/7 national helpline for England and Wales. That number is 0808 500 2222. Again, 0808 500 2222. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Westferry Times. Please do like and share this video and subscribe to Westferry Times. Stay informed, stay engaged, and take care.